Good day and greetings from Pretoria, South Africa. My name is Dr. Charles Cotter. I'm the Learning Navigator, the Change Management and Leadership in a Crisis online learning program, part of the e-learning series. This is an on-demand learning program and comprises of 6 modules. Each of the registered learners will receive a SlideShare presentation per module, and then also a detailed workbook which comprises the content, but also a series of learning activities, which I'll expect you to complete at the end of each of these modules. I think this is probably the best way of continuing this engagement and also to stimulate discussion between the Learning Navigator and the registered learners. As a form of introduction, I'd like to give you a quick overview of my professional pedigree. Essentially, I've been in the field of education, training, and development for the last 19 years. Of those 19, 15 as an independent contractor. I've been very privileged to have worked for over 140 different companies, both in the public and private sector. And of course, this stretches across 18 different countries and 4 different continents. My area of subject matter expertise is strategic management, change management, and also strategic human resources management. So at this point, I'd just like to do a quick summary. It's very clear that virtual teams provide many benefits for organizations. We've run through what these benefits are. We looked at the characteristics and the qualities, both from a reading article perspective, but also generic perspective. We looked at the different stages that teams move through, and in particular, as a virtual team, you would like to get to the most advanced stage, and that's stage 4, that's performing. And of course, once you've achieved that particular level of maturity, how do you maintain that? So I'd like us to look at how we can enhance all of the processes, the systems, motivational levels, productivity. We unpack that all quite extensively. And of course, we concluded this by trying to offer a counterpoint to this very strong drive, organizational drive, like I've mentioned with previous modules, apart from Microsoft, who are the early adopters with regards to the use of virtual teams, especially the technological teams, the design and development teams. Other iconic companies, technology giants like Twitter, like Google, they all embrace this virtual team structure, and it's become very fashionable. But the article does offer a counterpoint, also a video clip where we understand that there are different personalities and characters when it comes to change management. So it's a very comprehensive and a jam-packed module, but I'd like you to integrate all of that, tackle learning activity 16, which initially is the diagnosis of the current levels of team effectiveness, do the gap analysis, and then we'll conclude outcome 1 of module 6 by then tackling learning activity 17, which comprises of 5 questions, and of course respond to each of those 5 questions. Motivation, productivity, also how we can enhance team morale and team spirit. I think it's very important that we do that. So that is then the conclusion of learning activity 1 of module 6. As we continue with this module, we'll conclude this module by looking at the second outcome, and that, of course, is to look at employee wellness. Let's continue with module 6 by looking at outcome 2, and that is employee wellness, especially in a crisis management situation, especially in this highly disrupted work environment that we find ourselves in. And of course, we've said this previously, it's really a case of business unusual. It's no longer a business environment that we can classify as business as usual. And this leads to many employment challenges. And right at the top of the list of employee challenges right now, of course, is employee wellness. So what I'd like us to look at is some of the employee wellness strategies. And I think the best way of kicking off this particular module, outcome 2, is to look at a definition of employee wellness. And of course, this is the activities that focus on the overall physical, but also the mental health. Any activity that organization engages in, which is by design there to identify and assist prevention or correction of specific health problems or occupational hazards. And of course, this will then lead, similar to what we said with module 6, learning objective 1, this will lead to high levels of performance, productivity, and motivation. So the South African Board of People Practice define employee wellness as any strategy that ensures a safe and healthy working and social environment, which is then created, maintained, also with the individual wellness commitment that enables employees to perform optimally while complying with legislative requirements and other wellness best practices. And it's all geared towards the achievement of organizational goals and objectives. So the objectives of employee wellness, I think I've given you quite an extensive list there. Initially, to promote opportunities for engagement through the effective management of physical, mental, spiritual, financial, and even social well-being. So it's a holistic approach to employment management, also to minimize or mitigate the negative impact that it would have on organizational effectiveness, and also promoting a safe and healthy working environment, which will have many positive benefits like optimization of productivity, also the reduction of employment risk. I think with COVID-19, we know right now there are many strict measures that organizations have to take for re-entry of employees to the workplace. And I think organizations would almost like have to have a checklist. In South Africa, for instance, organizations are compelled by these regulations to appoint a COVID-19 compliance officer, and they need to work in collaboration with the formally appointed occupational health and safety officers and professionals and practitioners to make sure that we can contain the infection of this particular virus. And of course, there's a real cost saving if we can do that. And ultimately, the employee value proposition that we previously mentioned, which by design is to attract, retain, and motivate the cream of the crop, the top talent, the star performers. This will, of course, send a very clear signal to not only within the organization, but also the job market, that as an organization, we care about our people and we're interested in their well-being. And of course, their physical and mental and emotional health is very important. You'll see later on with this module, I'd like to conclude by looking at stress management and coping mechanisms and strategies, both at an individual but also an organizational level. So it's very clear that we need to promote an organizational culture which embraces individual health and overall organizational wellness. There are many organizational models that can be applied in a context of employee wellness. And I think this is the one that I found the most insightful, and that was the model developed by the South African Board of People Practice. And again, you're welcome to work through it, but it does suggest an integration between both the employee, but also the organizational contribution. And you'll see the employees, for example, need to maintain the self-responsibility, the awareness, also invest in attending communication and various training programs that the employer would organize. I think it's very important that employees take this responsibility, that they are disciplined, that they are self-directed in managing employee wellness. It cannot just be an organizational responsibility. Undoubtedly, it's a shared responsibility. And you'll see from an organizational perspective, there's real governance issues, like we said with our definition, compliance with the legislation, looking at our policies and procedures, looking at integration of our various talent and performance management, and even financial management. You'll see there's a cost management. Also, the outcome of this is wellness analytics, and we're going to look at some of these analytics. I think the positive outcome here would be to be classified as what we call a healthy organization, and we cannot get there without this wellness strategy. And of course, the wellness strategy will always require constant monitoring and evaluation, and almost become a cyclical process. With the generation of the wellness performance analytics, we'll then be able to determine, you'll see some of the indicators when we look at these analytics, absenteeism levels, also turnover levels, your sick leave liability, which I think is very costly for a lot of organizations, and they can ill afford that. Before we get to those analytics, I'd just like to take you to the performance of organizations globally. This is a study done by Deloitte, and you'll see over 11,000 global respondents who participated in the survey. And you'll find this in workbook 6, We don't have time to go through this in detail, but as you navigate through it, you'll see that there's definitely a disconnect between, you'll see the turquoise blue bar. This is what is highly valued and appreciated by employees relative to what organizations are actually offering. So almost without exception, you'll see what Deloitte calls a performance capability gap index. That is simply the differential. If you look at telecommuting, for example, this is from an employee perspective rated at 70%, yet from an organizational perspective, only 27%. So that would, in real terms, mean a 43% performance capability gap index. Similar to that, designated office space for wellness, again, very similar numbers in that regard. Reimbursement for well-being expenses, employee assistance programs, you'll see there's a 33% differential in that regard. Counseling, which employees would rate at 60%, but only 21%. I think this is quite concerning. Even your backup days, your daycare centers, these are often valued by employees as much as 53%, yet only 8% of organizations actually offering this. So that, I mean, that's a significant performance capability gap index. We're looking at around about 45%, which is astronomical. So I think it's very clear if you analyze the performance, organizations are not excelling when it comes to employee wellness. I think there's various reasons for that. And maybe this is one of the transformations that companies need to embark on as part of their change management strategy, is to reprioritize and to elevate and escalate employee wellness, not only to be regarded as an HR talent management priority, but also to be regarded as a business priority. So what employees really want isn't more money. I think we've established that, or better benefits. Sometimes we come to the conclusion that we overestimate the value of compensation benefits. They want to work at a place that is organizationally healthy. And I did speak about the analytics, and I did refer to the indicators of a healthy organization. I think this is almost a wish list for any hard-nosed business manager. What are we looking for? We want lower turnover. Yes, definitely. I'll take that any day of the week. Lower absenteeism, higher levels of productivity, high levels of employee job satisfaction, fewer healthcare claims. We spoke about the sick leave liability, and also from a labor union perspective, we want less union grievances, because when employees down tools, we know this is extremely costly, and millions of rands and dollars are lost on a daily basis because of employee industrial action, and especially when employees down tools on instruction of their shop stewards and labor union representatives. So I think this should be a change management goal that all organizations should strive for, especially during a time of crisis right now. It shouldn't just be about the COVID-19 virus, the pandemic. It should be about an overall and integrated wellness strategy, which is all-encompassing, which focuses on some of the real employment issues, which I think up until this point have been largely neglected. So based on the work of Gallup, you'll remember from early on in this program, I have quoted them quite significantly, especially as they are the global research thought leaders when it comes to employee engagement. And they do suggest one of their top 3 strategies is that we need to enhance employee well-being. So first of all, they do suggest that change management needs, again, seem to be very pivotal. This holistic development that we mentioned, both looking at individual and organizational performance, engagement levels, better health services are very important, and trying to counteract this disengagement, especially the active and sometimes even the passive disengagement that we sometimes find, which is almost the majority of the workforce who are either actively or passively disengaged. And we really need to guard against that. Resilience and agility, I'm not going to repeat that. Probably those are the 2 words that I've used the most frequently throughout this online learning program. Strong progressive overall well-being, and of course helping employees with coping mechanisms, employee wellness programs, employee assistance programs are very instrumental, and of course helping people through this very difficult time that we're experiencing right now. Employees who are thriving, they tend to be twice as more likely to excel in their jobs in comparison to people who are less engaged with their jobs. And of course, employees who are more engaged, there are real financial benefits. There's a real business case for this because, like we said, it reduces your healthcare bill, your healthcare costs as an organization. So the manager's role in improving employee engagement, well, we said it. We need to have an organizational strategy. This needs to be a business priority. This needs to be a strategic objective. And there needs to be real performance analytics and organizational outcomes. If we don't do that, as Peter Drucker said many times, what is measured is managed. If we don't measure the impact, if we don't monitor and track and evaluate, like we said, those performance indicators, those wellness analytics, then I'm afraid to say it'll never be managed as a priority. The communication of commitment to well-being, so again, change leaders need to be very vocal. We spoke about employee voice earlier on in this program. We need to hold leaders accountable. I think Gallup, this is their number one deal breaker. This is a very important driver of success. And of course, embedding these activities starting at a local level, individual development plans, which are then scaled up to virtual team plans, and of course, business unit and ultimately organizational plans. So there must be that cascading, there must be that alignment between the individual, the business unit, and ultimately the organizational goals. I think that's very important. Setting positive defaults by making healthy choices. Think, for example, with your vending machines and your cafeterias, making sure that you provide healthy snacks, that you don't offer these fizzy drinks, making sure that the drinks are hygienic and also healthy, and also making sure that there's opportunities for physical or social activities. And as we said, with outcome one of this module, this is a real challenge with this virtual working environment, this remote working culture, virtual teams, work from home structures, which are very popular at the moment. And you'll see the Counterpoint article and the final article as well, which is based on South African, but also a global study, reveals that employees actually miss going into the office. They miss this physical and social contact with their colleagues, with management, and it's going to be very difficult to find an alternative. There cannot be a surrogate for that kind of interaction that human beings crave. Some of us have been in lockdown. We've been restricted at home for 3.5 months, and I think it's becoming very problematic right now. And like we said, the CEO of Microsoft, but also the research intelligence is suggesting that we really need to create and forge stronger interpersonal connections. So I'd like to conclude Module 6, Outcome 2, by looking at stress management. In particular, I'd like us to look at some of the causes of stress. I'd like us to look at some of the individual and organizational strategies coping with stress, in particular, looking at the pyramid model. Let's start off the session with the causes of stress. And I think provided you with a long list of organizational causes, job design. And I think the one that is most relevant to this particular learning program is the unfamiliar and, of course, the change. And this is what we've been repeatedly mentioning throughout this online learning program. This is very critical, and this is often a huge source of stress. So we should never underestimate the impact of the crisis, the uncertainty, unfamiliarity, and also during times of change. So when we look at the outcomes of stress, you'll see in workbook 6, I do categorize them into 3. It's a physical, it's a psychological, but also the behavioral. And if you look at this particular graph, you'll see that the interpretation, if you want to optimize performance, that you need to achieve what we call a eustress level of stress. So it's a moderate level of stress If there's too little stress, it doesn't lead to optimal levels of performance. And if we find yourself in what we call the red zone, distress, you can have a look at some of the keywords there: fatigue, exhaustion, ill health, breakdown, and worst case scenario, total burnouts, and ultimately depression. So we need to guard against that. So to facilitate optimal levels of performance, we need to operate in this moderate level, this eustress zone. And I think this is something that change leaders need to facilitate. So we've agreed that stress management is a combination of both individual but also organizational strategies. And at an individual level, well, we've got strategies like meditation, journaling. I think for a lot of people that tends to be very effective. The work-life balance that we spoke about, which is very important. Good conflict resolution skills, present moment awareness. I think that's very important. A lot of us we talk about anticipatory stress, where we worry about things which don't actually ever materialize. And I think a lot of us can just change our mindset in that regard. Physical or sports activities and even productivity skill sets, I think, are important, and just monitoring and tracking our time and how we utilize our time. Also at an individual level, the pyramid approach, and you'll see the pyramid approach comprises of the foundational components, but then there's also the power component. So there's a total of 7. We've mentioned time management. We spoke about exercise. We spoke about making sure that our eating, our nutritional habits are on point. Also, the relaxation, which is very important. I think it's very rewarding to have a good work ethic, and you will be promoted, but sometimes working 14 to 15 hours a day could be very detrimental to not only your stress levels, but also to your overall health and well-being. Loving relationships, so there's also spiritual solution, which sometimes is a breakthrough for a lot of us. And of course, just our outlook on our life, our worldview, our viewpoints, how we frame situations. I think a lot of us tend to be very negatively minded, and I think rightfully so. There's a lot to be negative in the world today, but I think if you just change your outlook and you change your attitude, it could lead to mitigation or a reduction in your stress level. So this is a very useful tool at an individual level, looking at your stress management pyramid. Requires the foundational components, but also complemented, building on that, of course, is the 3 power components. From an organizational perspective, we said human resources management professionals, very pivotal in this regard. The job fit that we've mentioned earlier on, realistic job previews, so the job analysis, the job evaluation process, which is very important, supportive organizational employment practices, job design, employee assistance programs, which are at the front end of a lot of employee wellness strategies, also counseling, especially helping people with coping mechanisms, and ultimately creating employee wellness programs that are effective and, of course, tend to provide the safety net and the support that's needed, especially during a time of crisis where there's a lot of uncertainty. You'll recall with Module 1, we spoke about the VUCA environment, the volatility, the uncertainty, the complexity, the ambiguity. And as we started this module, the quote about crisis-induced problem solving, where we often are paralyzed by this radical type of change. The third and final article that I'd like you to work through with regards to Module 6 is then to look at the South African survey, which shows that people really miss the office. This was research conducted and published by a company by the name of Giant Leap. And what I found particularly useful is that they did not just fixate on South African research. You'll see, if you look at question 18.4, the article also references global research that was conducted by a company, Gensler, so a Giant Leap and Gensler, and they came to the same conclusions as to what I mentioned about this missing of the office and colleagues, and of course this putting a lot of pressure and stress on employees as they remigrate to the workplace. So the article is titled South African Survey Shows People Really Miss What They Really Miss About the Office. And I'd like you to read through that. Again, you'll find that in workbook 6. And then the penultimate learning activity 18. The final one I'll get to very shortly, learning activity 19. So there are a total of 4 questions, 18.1. So the healthy organization that we've mentioned to counteract and to mitigate employee frustration and stress during a time of crisis, what can we do? So what are the practical interventions to help us to better manage those indicators of a healthy organization, and how do we reposition as part of our employee value proposition, as part of this culture, how do we reprioritize employee wellness and become a healthy organization, an employer of choice? Also, question 18.2, where I want you to look at your wellness and employee assistance strategies that organizations can utilize during times of radical change and crisis, not only to motivate, but also to retain our star performers in particular. Question 18.3 has to do with stress management. And again, I'd like you to review the individual and organizational stress management strategies, starting off with the identification of the root causes of stress in your virtual teams, in your business unit, in your organization. And from that, I'd like you to pinpoint what are the most appropriate individual, but also organizational stress management strategies. As I've mentioned, question 18.4, I want you to refer to the article and extract and apply the most relevant employee wellness research intelligence. You'll see there's also a nice cross-reference with the counterpoint article of the Microsoft CEO, where he cautions teams, virtual team structures, that we don't use this on a permanent basis. I think there's also reference there to, in fact, the final statement of the article, where he does talk about burnouts and other employee wellness issues. So I think it's a real pressing challenge that organizations are confronted with at the moment. Again, you'll find all of the literature in workbook 6. And if you could, in 3 to 4 pages, just capture the responses to these 4 questions, and again, email it to me. As we transition to the conclusion of Module 6, I'd like you to watch a video clip. It's approximately 8 minutes in length, and it has to do with the transformation process, which is proposed by one of the top management consultancies in the world, McKinsey, and they refer to the 5 A's. And what I'd like you to do with the final learning activity, as we collate and we look at this entire program, and we've identified the areas that need to change, what I would like you to do is to see how you can apply these 5 A's. What are these 5 A's? Let's have a look at them quickly. So first of all, the aspiration, we need to aspire, we need to assess, we need to be architects, we need to develop the blueprint for this transformation. We need to act, so we need to transition from intent to action, and of course then we need to advance, we need to make progress. I think this is very important, and I think it's a very good way of integrating the transformation and change management process. So that will then be the final learning activity 19. So I'd like you to look at this holistically, and I'd like you to reflect on the previous 5 modules, including Module 6. And in light of what you've learned throughout this online learning program, I'd like you to draft a 3 to 4 page essay in which you demonstrate your ability to apply the 5 A's, which you would have sourced from the McKinsey YouTube video clip of the transformation process. And as a form of final learning engagement and discussion, if you could email that essay to me, and then it'll be a very good way of integrating and applying the entire change management process as we've navigated through the entire online learning program. So at this point, I'd like to summarize outcome 2 of Module 6. So you'll recall we looked at employee wellness, We looked at the employee wellness definitions. We looked at the model for employee wellness. We looked at what a healthy organization looks like. We reaffirmed the very important priority that this should be very high up on the business agenda. And then, of course, we looked at the Gallup perspective of how to enhance employee well-being, in particular from a change management and leadership perspective. I think that's very important. And then we looked at a couple of video clips, a couple of reading articles, just to challenge our existing paradigms and our thoughts. And also, we concluded that particular module by looking at stress management. I think stress management, the causes of stress, also looking at the optimal levels of stress, the eustress zone that we mentioned, looking at the individual, but also the organizational strategies, looking at the pyramid, which is a stress management strategy at individual level. And then we concluded by looking at the video clip, how we can integrate the McKinsey 5As into this global transformation process that we need to embark on. This is Dr. Charles Cotter. It's been an absolute pleasure as your learning navigator to take you through the 6-modular program. And also I'd like to wish you with similar modules, wish you good luck as you embark on this change management journey. You do have my contact details. I'll put up for the final time. So you'll find my contact details. This is the very final slide. My email address, my YouTube channel. You'll find me very active on LinkedIn, my company page on LinkedIn, also on Twitter, Facebook, and like I've said, SlideShare. You're welcome to check out a sample of the body of my work, my portfolio of 155 different SlideShare presentations. This is part of the portfolio, and you're welcome to stay in contact with me. If you have any specific questions, please drop me an email. I look forward to receiving your responses to the 19 learning activities. I know it sounds very intimidating, but I think if you systematically work through this program, module by module, I think you'll be able to hopefully get some real learning benefit from it. This is your learning navigator, Dr. Charles Cotter, signing out, and I'd like to wish you good luck on your journey, and I hope that our learning paths will cross again, either through another online on-demand learning program, or even maybe return to traditional face-to-face training program, or even at a global conference. Thank you.
This is Charles Cotter signing out. I'd like to thank you for watching the video clip, Change Management and Leadership in a Crisis online learning program. Please be on the lookout for subsequent uploads on my YouTube learning channel of the other modules. Also, please have a look at the chat box section. You'll see in the comment section. If you'd like to access a copy of the workbook in PDF format, I'll gladly email that to you for this specific module, but also the other modules of the various video clips. I'd also like to remind you to subscribe to my YouTube channel. Please press the notification bell to be alerted of the subsequent uploads of the other modules, and also like to encourage you to reach out and contact me. My contact details and social media presence will be provided on the screen very shortly, so I'd encourage you to reach out, and of course I would welcome any sort of communication or feedback regarding this video clip or any other learning content on my YouTube learning channel. Thank you. I appreciate your ongoing interest and active social media support. Thank you. You keep well. Bye-bye.